Israel's military has admitted its soldiers made mistakes over the killing of 15 emergency workers in Gaza last month, which sparked international outrage. Mobile phone footage that emerged forced Israel to change its account of what caused its troops to open fire on the rescue workers. The Israeli army said the convoy had been approaching suspiciously without headlights or flashing lights. A military official has now admitted that was inaccurate. Dan Johnson reports, and a warning: you may find some of the footage distressing.
This video challenges Israel's account of why its soldiers opened fire with such deadly force. It's just before dawn, and the Red Crescent paramedics and civil defense workers are answering a call to help the wounded near Rafah. Israel's military first said this convoy advanced suspiciously towards troops with the lights switched off. But you can see these are marked vehicles and they're wearing reflective uniforms. Then, without warning, this. The shooting continues for more than 5 minutes. The paramedic who's filming says his last prayers. Refat Redwan was one of 15 killed.
His phone was found with his body, and he recorded the whole event. His last words before being shot: "Forgive me, Mom. I just wanted to help people. I wanted to save lives."
The footage only emerged when teams could safely reach this site 7 days later. The bodies were buried along with the vehicles. Regular practice, the army says, to protect them from animals. The UN called this a mass grave. Israel's account was already in question. The only paramedic to live through the shooting told us earlier this week they had their lights on and it was clear they were medics.
I am the only survivor who saw what happened to my colleagues, and I will expose the crimes committed by the occupation against them.
On Tuesday, Israel's response was in defense of its forces.
The IDF did not randomly attack an ambulance. Last Sunday, several uncoordinated vehicles were identified advancing suspiciously toward IDF troops without headlights.
Now, that narrative's been upended. Tonight, a military official admitted the soldiers were mistaken about the lights and the threat they were under. The army insists 6 of the dead belonged to Hamas, but it denies they were executed at close range. The changing story, though, is only increasing the pressure for an independent investigation. This footage lay buried for a week in the Gaza sand. Now it is forcing Israel to give answers and adding to the calls for accountability. Dan Johnson, BBC News in Jerusalem.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet Donald Trump at the White House on Monday. He'll be the first world leader to visit Washington since the US president announced sweeping global tariffs. Israel's itself facing a 17% levy on all goods. It had tried and failed to avoid the measures by preemptively dropping duties on American goods affected by them. The meeting between the two leaders is the first since President Trump unveiled his proposal for the US to take control and own the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said it's deeply concerning that 2 Labour MPs were detained on a visit to Israel. Abtizam Mohammed and Yuan Yang were both refused entry into the country by Israeli immigration officials after landing at Tel Aviv airport on Saturday night. According to Israeli media reports, they were denied entry because they intended to spread hateful rhetoric against Israel, the Israeli population and the immigration authority. In a statement, David Lammy said, "I've made clear to my counterparts in the Israeli government that this is no way to treat British parliamentarians, and we've been in contact with both MPs tonight to offer our support." Tom Simons reports.
Abtizam Mohammed, a Sheffield MP, and Yuan Yang, who represents a Reading constituency, were detained yesterday trying to enter Israel. The British government said they were on a parliamentary delegation. Both are certainly strong critics of Israel's military action in Gaza and the death and destruction it's caused. But media outlets in Israel, quoting the country's authorities, said the MPs admitted when questioned they would be spreading what was described as hateful rhetoric against Israel. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy said on X, "It is unacceptable, counterproductive and deeply concerning that 2 British MPs on a parliamentary delegation to Israel have been detained and refused entry by the Israeli authorities. I've made it clear to my counterparts in the Israeli government that this is no way to treat British parliamentarians." The 2 MPs have both put pressure on their ministers to introduce sanctions against Israel.
Ethnic cleansing is taking place before our very own eyes and the world remains silent. Will the minister confirm that Israel must allow Palestinians to return to northern Gaza and that any settlements there would be illegal?
We would like more action, and we do not think the current action is enough. And so I would like to remind him of the comments previously made by the Prime Minister on looking into sanctions against Minister Ben-Gvir and Minister Smotrich for their comments supporting the illegal resettlement of northern Gaza.
Yang Yuan, a former Financial Times journalist, has also highlighted the lack of access for the media in Gaza, preventing first-hand reporting. The MPs are expected to release a statement tomorrow. An aide for Yuan Yang said the priority was getting them back to the UK as quickly as possible. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Well, Yaakov Katz is a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute and a former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. I asked him why the British MPs had been detained.
I think that what we can definitely say is that Moshe Arbel, the Interior Minister, doesn't make these decisions independently. This is based on information that he receives definitely from security authorities as well as from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, some intelligence basically indicating what these MPs might be doing. But just to give some context to it, it's not the first time that Israel has done something like this to elected officials that it fears might be coming to the country to stir unrest. A few years ago, during the first Trump administration, 2 Democratic members of the House of Representatives, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, well-known and very vocal, vitriol critics of Israel, came and tried to enter the country, and they were also denied entry. So this is something that Israel very rarely does, even when engaging with friends of it, like the United States or the United Kingdom. So I think that what we're looking at is really a delicate balance between Israel's interest and, of course, maintaining and preserving very important political, diplomatic, cultural relations with these countries, but at the same time, making sure that people, like any country, is allowed to prevent people from entering who are going to undermine the fabric of society and try to cause harm to the state of Israel.
Well, let's get more of this by going live to Jerusalem and join our chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. Gary, first of all, we're talking about these 2 British Labour MPs being denied entry on Saturday night. How is that being reported in Israel?
Well, the facts of it are being reported as you'd expect, and we've actually had some contact, or the BBC's had some contact with one of the MPs who said they wouldn't be saying anything until they got back to the UK. I can tell you that we've just heard from the Interior Ministry here who say that those 2 MPs, and presumably, although we'll check this with their 2 aides, left the country at 6 a.m. this morning, so that's about 3 hours ago. So they should be back in the UK in short order, and that's when they said they would make a statement about what had happened to them. But effectively, they were denied entry, and the Israeli authorities have been saying because they were here not on an official delegation, which is something the Foreign Office has contradicted, and also because they were here, according to the Israelis, to spread hatred. We'll see what the MPs themselves have to say when they land, but this has clearly caused a lot of tension between the government in London, with the Foreign Secretary describing it as unacceptable and saying this is no way to treat a delegation of parliamentarians.
Yes, the reasons given were that they intended to spread hateful rhetoric. Do we understand what they mean by that?
No, we don't. There's been no elaboration on what they meant by that. And of course, that doesn't sound like something you would say if you were questioned, does it? I'm here to spread hateful rhetoric. So we'll see what their account of that interview and that interrogation was when they land. But clearly these two MPs have a background. The Israeli authorities will know that background, know what they've said on the record in Parliament about Israel and about Israel's activities. And I've no doubt that will have been part of the judgment here. They will have checked these people out before they came in and made a decision that they didn't want to let them into the country.
Gary, Benjamin Netanyahu shortly on his way to Washington for a meeting with Donald Trump. What's Israel hoping to get out of that meeting?
Well, it's his second visit, isn't it, to Washington since the election, since the US election, or since Donald Trump took over on the 20th of January again. And clearly trade will be an important part of that, because as part of these worldwide tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed, Israel was slapped with a 17% tariff, despite the fact that the government here had removed all tariffs on US goods just before Donald Trump made his announcement. So I'm sure there'll be some lobbying on that score. And I think he'll want to also try to ensure that he's got the latitude to do what he wants to do in Gaza in particular, with this current offensive there and creating these new, what Israel calls these new security zones in these new corridors, which is something that's come up for a lot of criticism, under a lot of criticism from the UN and other international players and organizations. And Benjamin Netanyahu will want to know that he's still got Donald Trump's backing in that regard as well.
And finally, Gary, we've had the reports from the Israeli military admitting that its initial accounts of what happened when 15 emergency workers were killed on March the 23rd, they've admitted mistakes in those initial accounts. What do we understand actually did take place?
Well, in some sense, they've been forced to admit these mistakes, because a video emerged yesterday which showed these vehicles, these ambulances and a fire truck, approaching where their occupants were actually killed, with all their lights on and with their signals flashing. Now, the Israeli authorities had originally said that they were acting suspiciously, they had no lights on, no emergency signals flashing, and that's why they'd been engaged by the Israeli forces in this suburb, this area just outside of Rafah in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Now, they say that they're looking into it. They say that at least 6 of those who were killed had links with Hamas. They have produced no evidence to prove that or to demonstrate that at this stage. And they have said that none of these people that were killed were armed. They were then buried in these shallow graves covered over by sand. The Israeli authorities say they did that to prevent wild animals from taking the bodies of these people. But it did then take a week for the UN to be able to find this sort of shallow grave, I suppose you'd call it. And some of the people that examined those bodies have suggested that these were sort of execution-style killings, perhaps some people with their hands tied. That's something the Israelis have denied.
Gary, thank you very much for your time. That's our Chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue in Jerusalem.